You can tell a lot by a political party or a political candidate by looking at the elites who are endorsing them and what it is that they're saying when they do. For more than 4 years now, all sorts of people who are part of the war machine in Washington, who embrace the neoconservative ideology of starting wars all over the country as a way of asserting American influence and enriching the weapons manufacturers of the United States, all the people who are most vested in preservation of the ruling class status quo have been radically and rapidly migrating from the Republican Party, where they once resided, especially after the war on terror, during the war on terror, after the 9/11 attack, and during the Bush-Cheney administration, gradually, but also very inexorably toward the Democratic Party. And now it's a quite rapid migration ever since Trump arrived. And that's why it was anything but a surprise when 2 weeks ago, first Liz Cheney and then Dick Cheney, once considered to be the embodiment of Satan, a new Hitler, by the consensus of American liberals, to say nothing of the allegation that he stole the 2000 election, came out and didn't just repudiate Donald Trump, but affirmatively endorsed Kamala Harris. And when doing so, Liz Cheney, on behalf of her dad, said the reason for it was that Kamala Harris's foreign policy better aligns with the foreign policy of the Cheney family, which has not changed at all, then a Trump-led Republican Party would align with it. Now, even though that was unsurprising, it was extremely revealing. In case the migration of all these neocons and Bush-Cheney operatives was too subtle, having Dick Cheney come out and say he thinks Kamala Harris, the Democratic nominee, would make the better president, should have made this vividly manifest to everyone who hadn't yet realized what this realignment has become. In case that wasn't clear enough, we have even a more vivid example that happened today from The Guardian. Just earlier today, you can see the headline: more than 700 national security officials endorse Kamala Harris for president. The public letter calls the vice president a candidate who, quotes, defends America's democratic ideals, and says Donald Trump is unfit for the job. Quote, the letter, signed by retired U.S. Navy Rear Admiral Michael Smith and hundreds of others, criticized the former president's remarks about, quote, terminating the U.S. Constitution over his lie that the 2000 election was stolen and his suggestion of becoming a, quote, dictator if reelected. Both of those quotes are completely fabricated. If you go and look at what Trump said when he said, I'm going to be a dictator on day one, he was talking to Sean Hannity, and he was clearly joking, and he made immediately clear that he was joking by saying, what I mean is I'm going to just on day one sign executive orders to close the border and begin deporting people who are here illegally and who are violent. He didn't say, I'm going to be a dictator for the next 4 years starting on day one, but these are the kinds of fabricated quotes that start circulating by the media, and they never stop, no matter how often they're debunked. The Guardian article goes on, quote, among those signing the letter is the former Secretary of State and 2016 presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. No, imagine, she doesn't support Trump but supports Kamala. Jeff Blake, who served as the U.S. ambassador to Australia under Barack Obama, and the former CIA director John Deutsch. For decades, it had been a staple, an anchor of left liberal politics in the United States, that the CIA and the U.S. security state in general was the embodiment of evil, the root of all evil in American politics. They were the part of the government that acted in secret, with no democratic accountability, with no ethical limits of any kind, and that intensified in the wake of the war on terror when they began becoming more and more involved, not just with foreign affairs and the politics of foreign countries, but the politics of the United States and domestic thought and domestic speech as well. And yet it's very clear that the U.S. security state, the CIA, all of those institutions have been and continue to be aligned with the Democratic Party, because what they fear most is Donald Trump, for reasons that we can evaluate another time. But clearly they do fear Donald Trump, which is why, not just now, but even back in 2016, you saw the Democratic head of the CIA, Michael Morrell, who served under President Obama, as well as the Republican head of the CIA, General Michael Hayden, who served both as the director of the CIA and the NSA under George Bush and Dick Cheney, come out in separate op-eds, one in the New York Times, one in the Washington Post in 2016, and try and warn the country that Donald Trump was some sort of agent of the Kremlin in order to ensure his defeat. This trend has been ongoing for a long time. The U.S. security state, just like Dick Cheney, feels far, far more comfortable within the Democratic Party than a Trump-led Republican Party. Now, here's some of the rationale from the letter itself explaining why. There you see the title, NSL 4A endorses Kamala Harris for President of the United States. That's the National Security Leaders for America. That's the group that they're calling themselves. You can see the little logo they created there with the name underneath, and this is part of what the letter says. Quote, "To the American people, we are former public servants. We are former public servants who swore an oath to the Constitution." That's what the leaders of the CIA, the NSA, Pentagon officials are. They're just former public servants who believe in the Constitution. Many of us have risked our lives for it. We are retired generals, admirals, senior non-commissioned officers, ambassadors, and senior civilian national security leaders. We are Republicans, Democrats, and independents. We are loyal to the ideals of our nation, like freedom, democracy, and the rule of law, not to any one individual or party. We do not agree on everything, but we all adhere to two fundamental principles. First, we believe America's national security requires a serious and capable commander-in-chief. Second, we believe American democracy is invaluable. Each generation has a responsibility to defend it. That is why we, the undersigned, proudly endorse Kamala Harris to be the next president of the United States. Vice President Harris has proven she is an effective leader able to advance American national security interests. Now, American national security interests, as this bipartisan foreign policy establishment blob perceives it. The foreign policy interest, the national security interests, and the ideology surrounding it that has destroyed so many places around the world as well as our own country. They're saying that's the agenda Kamala Harris will faithfully advance, and I agree with them completely that she will. As I said, if I were Dick Cheney, or if I were John Brennan, or if I were James Clapper, or any of these previous CIA directors or NSA operatives or members of the Pentagon who care most about the war machine being funded, I also would endorse Kamala Harris. She would definitely be my candidate too. I understand exactly why they're doing this. And I hope everyone else does too. The letter goes on, quote, "Her relentless diplomacy with allies around the globe preserved a united front in support of Ukraine's fight against Russian aggression." So we're supposed to believe that it was Kamala Harris whose diplomacy aligned these countries behind the United States and NATO. This was something Joe Biden said, that with his ample foreign policy experience, he was the one who engineered. But diplomacy is not about gathering alliances to fight wars. I mean, I guess it could be, but typically the benefit of diplomacy is averting war or resolving a war once it begins. And there's been no diplomacy from Joe Biden or Kamala Harris precisely because they want that work to continue, and so does the U.S. security state, hence their endorsement of Kamala Harris. The letter goes on, quote, "Conversely, Donald Trump has publicly and privately excoriated the leaders of our most steadfast allies, including the United Kingdom, Israel, Australia, Canada, and Germany." So apparently, one of the problems with the national security officials here is that the belief that Donald Trump has been too critical of the Israeli government, and hence you see this statement that he has excoriated the leaders of other countries that aren't our own, including Israel. Apparently, this is a view that they're trying to perpetrate, that Donald Trump is somehow more hostile to Israel than Kamala Harris is. And then here you see some of the signatories, the distinguished signatories on this list. You have John Brennan, who's the former director of the CIA. You have Janet Napolitano, who's the former Secretary of Homeland Security and the former governor of Arizona. You have Jeremy Bash, the former chief of staff of the Department of Defense, Lieutenant General Jim Clapper, USAF, and the former Director of National Intelligence, Ambassador Susan Rice, former President, National Security Advisor to the President, and Ambassador Victoria Nuland, the former Acting Deputy Secretary of State, as well as Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State and former U.S. Senator from New York. Now, these are the people who have destroyed the foreign policy of the United States. If you like the Iraq War, if you like the dirty wars in Syria and Libya, to try and engineer regime change there, if you like the endless funding of the war in Ukraine, the constant growth of the powers of the CIA and the NSA, including here at home, including to censor American discourse and speech and to surveil American citizens and everyone else throughout the world, then I absolutely agree. Kamala Harris is your candidate. And it doesn't mean, just let me be clear, that Donald Trump will subvert those policies. But what it does mean is that Kamala Harris is a much more reliable vehicle for advancing those foreign policies than Donald Trump is. Trump might advance them depending on his mood, depending on who he's listening to last. He might actually try and subvert some of them. He's just too unpredictable for this foreign policy establishment that wants more than anything the disastrous foreign policy of the United States to continue, because even though it prejudices the interests of most Americans, it benefits the interests of the people they care most about, which are the elites who benefit and profit from war, and the leaders of the U.S. security state and the Pentagon, who become far more powerful whenever endless war continues. Now, it's not only Dick Cheney and the CIA and the NSA and the Pentagon supporting Kamala Harris, so too are Reagan, Bush, McCain, and Romney alumni. On September 18th, just a little bit, just last week, about 4 days ago, here you see over 100 Republican national security leaders endorse Vice President Harris. Quote, Donald Trump cannot be trusted to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and bear true faith and allegiance to the same. Quote, we are prepared to support her as president because she has pledged to ensure America always has the strongest, most lethal fighting force in the world, and to honor and respect those who wear the uniforms, supported a strong NATO to stand up to Russia and protect European and American security, and has been firm in her support of Ukraine. So if those are the things that you want, that we're going to keep paying for and being a part of this aggressive military alliance with Western Europe, that the war in Ukraine will forever, indefinitely be funded and continue to be fueled, then again, that's absolutely the sort of thing that would, I think, quite reasonably make somebody support Kamala Harris. Now, I just want to give you a little bit of sense of what this faction really is after. Because I think sometimes it's perceived that all of these people only care about the military-industrial complex and the war machine, and that absolutely is their primary objective. But what they really have is an ideology, and the ideology is have the United States dominate the world through superior military force. Back in April of 2022, when I was still writing at Substack, I wrote an article about how every time there is legislation proposed or regulatory action taken to weaken the power of big tech so that all of our speech isn't concentrated in and controlled by a tiny group of big tech behemoths, it is these same people, John Brennan and James Clapper and Michael Hayden, from both political parties across the political spectrum, who come out and demand that big tech not ever be weakened, that it's, in fact, its monopoly power continues to grow. And here you see the headline from the article that I wrote, when it looked as though Congress was moving under the Biden administration toward legislation that would protect consumers by weakening the monopoly power of, saying, Google or Facebook. It was former intelligence officials, the same ones who endorsed Kamala Harris today, the same exact ones who issued that letter right before the 2020 election, lying and saying that the Hunter Biden laptop and reporting based on it was Russian disinformation. These are trained liars. And it's the same circle of people over and over trying to control and manipulate and interfere in our politics. What they do is they come out and they say, no, big tech, as you can see by the headline, their monopoly power is vital to national security. Quote, when the U.S. security state announces that big tech's centralized censorship power must be preserved, we should ask what this reveals about whom this regime serves, meaning this regime of censorship that has been centralized in big tech. And it's the U.S. security state that wants to make sure that they can control the speech and discourse of Americans. This is all part of their agenda, and it's an agenda that Kamala Harris and the Democrats absolutely share. And it's one of the reasons why I still find and always found the attempt to ban TikTok so disturbing, because what that was this group of people identifying one platform who they couldn't control in terms of what speech is allowed, what censorship has to be imposed. And so they wanted to either shut it down or force a sale of it to a company who they could better control. Now, at the same time that the war machine and the military-industrial complex, people like Dick Cheney and neocons like Bill Kristol, are united behind Kamala Harris, she's going around making sure that corporate America is as well, meaning the large multinational corporations that ship jobs overseas, that profit greatly at the expense of pretty much the whole country. And what she's doing is what Hillary Clinton was revealed to have been doing in 2016 when those WikiLeaks emails were released and she got caught doing it, which is running a campaign pretending that she wants to implement policies to help ordinary people in their economic situation, but then privately telling the big donors on whom the Democratic Party relies that she doesn't really mean it. Here's the Wall Street Journal yesterday. Kamala Harris makes undercover push to win over corporate America. The vice president has campaigned on holding big business accountable, but has privately sought advice from CEOs, investors. Quote, she has hosted dinners of 8 to 10 chief executives at the vice president's Naval Observatory residence, according to attendees, to discuss a range of topics with guests such as visas, Ryan McInerney, who has donated to both Democrats and Republicans, Motorola's Greg Brown, a Republican, and CV Health's Karen Lynch, who isn't publicly affiliated with either party. Over the course of hours, attendees said she would typically listen to their thoughts on infrastructure funding, the Inflation Reduction Act, diversity, equity, inclusion efforts, China, and the labor market. Some of them came away impressed. Quote, she was given a bad rap in the echo chamber, said one. And they have really lined up behind her, just like in 2020 with Biden and Trump, and just like in 2016 with Biden and Hillary. The Democrats and Kamala Harris's campaign are not just being supported by the U.S. security state, but by all of big corporate America that Donald Trump ran his campaign in 2016 on opposing, and that Democrats try and now commandeer that populist agenda, even while Kamala Harris assures these corporate leaders in private that she will serve their agenda, which is why they're supporting her. Now, I want to just make clear that while the military-industrial complex and the arms industry and the intelligence community and the U.S. security state and neocons are lined up behind Dick Cheney, it's not because Donald Trump is running on the same sort of non-interventionist policy that he ran on in 2016. One of the things that happened to Trump is that his campaign depends to a very alarming amount on the funding of Miriam Adelson, who married Sheldon Adelson, one of the world's richest person, who was very open about the fact that the only issue that he really cared about was having the United States support Israel, fund Israel, arm Israel. And he used his billions and billions of dollars to spread throughout the Republican Party to ensure that they adhered to his agenda, just like plenty of pro-Israel billionaires do for the Democratic Party as well. But Trump is particularly reliant on Miriam Adelson in this campaign. She's giving him $100 million for his campaign to try and ensure his election. And so Trump has built his campaign to a very notable extent, a very non-trivial extent, quite substantive extent, on promising over and over and over and over and over again that he will do everything he possibly can for Israel, that he will give Israel everything that it wants. He's campaigning on this preposterous claim that the Democratic Party, which is steadfastly pro-Israel and long has been, Joe Biden armed Israel and gave them everything they needed and wanted and more over the past year, just like he's been doing his whole career, that somehow Israel will be in danger in terms of its existence if Kamala Harris wins because the Democrats are so anti-Israel. But Trump, he's been boasting, is so pro-Israel that every time the Adelsons come to visit him, and he says nobody visited the White House in his first term more than Sheldon and Miriam Adelson, who again only care about Israel. He said every time they came, he gave them something for Israel, and they keep coming back and always want more, and he says he's going to give it to them. Here he is speaking to the Israeli-American Council, and just listen to Trump in his own words.
Just as I promised, I recognized Israel's eternal capital and opened the American embassy in Jerusalem. Jerusalem became the capital. I also recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. You know, Miriam and Sheldon.
By the way, for those of you who are listening to this as an audio, you may not be able to notice, but in this crowd that's listening to him and cheering for him, you see all sorts of Israeli flags. You see very, very few American flags, if you see any. It reminds me a lot of that time when Republicans and Fox News tried to turn into heroes those students at the University of North Carolina for having put back up the American flag against pro-Palestinian protesters who had taken it down and tried to turn them into some sort of uber patriots that we should all revere. I think they even did a GoFundMe campaign where they got something like $60,000 or something. And then once the students started getting interviewed, they actually admitted, no, we didn't do that for the United States. Our cause is Israel. We were there to defend Israel. And all over the place outside of that one scene that was shown were Israeli flags waving, just like Israeli flags are waving here. And this is the crowd Trump is speaking to. And he's promising that he will give them everything and more. Let's listen to the rest.
Sheldon would come into the White House probably almost more than anybody outside of people that worked there. And they were always after, and as soon as I'd give them something, always for Israel. As soon as I'd give them something, they'd want something else. I said, give me a couple of weeks, will you please? But I gave them the Golan Heights, and they never even asked for it. You know, for 72 years, they've been trying to do the Golan Heights, right? And even Sheldon didn't have the nerve. But I said, you know what? I said to David Friedman, give me a quick lesson, like 5 minutes or less on the Golan Heights. And he did. And I said, let's do it. We got it done in about 15 minutes, right?
Isn't that a weird way of advancing the America First agenda? Make America great again, to go around the country campaigning on the basis of how much you're going to give to Israel, bragging about the fact that every time Sheldon and Miriam Adelson come to the White House, you give them something else for Israel, even if they don't ask for it. And then he said he had David Friedman, who was his ambassador, U.S. ambassador to Israel, one of the most fanatical pro-Israel extremists that exist on the planet. And he said, yeah, I don't know anything about the Golan Heights. I don't even know what it is. Can you give me a 5-minute summary of what it is? And then after he got a 5-minute summary from David Friedman, he said, yeah, let's give the Golan Heights to Israel. So it's, as I said, it's not like Trump is campaigning so explicitly on undermining core American foreign policy. He's surrounded by people who believe in American foreign policy more than anybody. In fact, many of his closest advisors are people who criticize the Biden-Harris administration, not on Ukraine, not for supporting the war in Ukraine too much, but for supporting it insufficiently. That we should lift all the limits, give them all the long-range missiles to shoot into Moscow. Now, the problem is that Trump did select J.D. Vance as his vice president, who has a much more anti-interventionist and sustained agenda of populism when it comes to foreign policy. And there are people surrounding Trump who feel the same, and he has frequently defended a form of anti-interventionism and populism in his foreign policy. It's just that this campaign has become a much more traditional Republican campaign on foreign policy. And so, as always, the campaign, in large part, is about the two candidates fighting over who's better for Israel. As I said, this letter issued by the U.S. security state actually accuses Trump of excoriating the Israeli leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, as though that's a bad thing, and saying Kamala Harris is a better, more reliable defender of our allies such as Israel. And then you have a Trump over here saying, no, I'm much better for Israel. But at the end of the day, the people who live in Washington who are defending their interests are the people who understand Washington best, and what they're making extremely clear is that there's one candidate and one candidate only who will best advance their rotted foreign policy agenda and foreign policy ideology, and that's Kamala Harris, and I think they have very good reason for believing that. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.